Just your first reaction to this story in regards to data bundles and the fact that, as much as, the former Kiambu governor is saying the same, it's been a concern that has been raised by common Mwananchi.
Well, I've just seen that story, and I'm not privy to all the details of what he's going to be suing for. But I think comparing unga to bandwidth is a long shot. They're very different commodities. Most commodities, including service, have expiry dates. The only thing about bandwidth is that it's a service that exists when it does, right? Unlike unga, it's not food that you can store in a fridge or in a cupboard somewhere. I think what the former governor should be concerned about is if we have any bait and switch that takes place, then I think then you'd have a right to sue. But the terms and conditions of the way bandwidth is offered are very clear, right? We offer it because it's available. They've made reference to what happens in other jurisdictions. I think I had mentioned of South Africa, yes, where there's you're allowed to renew, and he's talking about paying an amount of money to be allowed to renew. All that is possible with different pricing. At the end of the day, it's how you price is commodity, because bandwidth for telcos costs whether or not you use it. Unlike unga, once the unga has been given to you and you take it, it's now under your care. But the bandwidth that we're offering you, which is shared bandwidth by your fellow consumers, it costs the power used, the transmission used, that cost exists for the telcos whether or not it is utilized by the consumers. And that is a significant difference from the commodities that he's comparing them to. So it's not analogous to food commodities.
Okay, and just, you said, like in principle, I buy 1 GB of data, and I've paid the full price for that.
What is the full price? You see, when you're told buy 1 GB of data and for 12 hours, right? We're able to supply you that 1 GB for those 12 hours, and we're paying for it. Any additional 1 GB beyond the 12 hours is a different cost for us. It's a different bandwidth from what we offered you. So it's not the same bundle of unga, bale of unga. It's a different one, right? So I think it is important that when we're discussing these things, understanding the underlying dynamics and fundamentals is critical, because you can give analogies here that mean nothing. I think what is important is that the terms and conditions are very clear, and that where there's bait and switch, and I know that there have been acquisitions by some customers that there has been some bait and switch where, for instance, the bundle expires before the period that was prescribed by the telco. Then you have a right to complain. But if at the point of acquiring the bundle, it was very clear how long it would last, and the reason for that is because we have a certain cost during that period, then I think one can't complain.
So what may be a request that, for the sake of those who may not understand the dynamics of the telco, what cost is it to you to offer me bundles? What cost do you incur as the telco that you're saying that there's a cost to it?
When you speak or you send data, those are signals, electric signals, right? That's power. There's power being used up that has to be paid for. Transmission has a cost, right? And so you come in, by the way, and bandwidth is shared, by the way, right? You've seen that sometimes during certain times of the day, you have faster speeds than other times of the day because there are more people sharing that bandwidth. That's to tell you that it exists constantly. Whether you come in or not, the bandwidth already exists, and the power being applied to make that bandwidth available, we still have to pay for, right? And that is why I'm saying that the fundamentals of how this technology works, our former governor would need to understand the fundamentals. I'm sure his lawyers, before he goes to court, will explain to him some of these fundamentals, because it isn't as easy as a TV soundbite. It is a lot more than that. It's an easy, funny soundbite, but at the end of the day, they're completely different scenarios, completely different. That's the food commodity and the service you're offering are completely different types of things and elements.
It's not a like-for-like analogy.
No, it's not.
All right, let's talk about your merger with your planned merger with Airtel. Where are we with that?
Well, it's still progressing, and I think when we announced this transaction, we said that we had been in discussions for a while with Airtel, and now we'd moved to the next phase where we're now engaging the regulators, because before such a transaction can be concluded, we need regulatory approval, from the Communications Authority, from the Competition Authority, and that is progressing apace.
Okay,
yeah.
So when are we looking at having this concluded in an ideal situation?
You know, you never want to prejudge or anticipate regulators because it is, it is their mandate and it is within their power. But we expect in the next few months, hopefully, it should be concluded. I see no reason why it should not be concluded. We have had very good engagements with the regulators.
Okay, and we've seen over the past number of months, every quarter when when the regulator gives the report, we see both Telkom and Airtel have been increasing in terms of the market share. What for you, first of all, do you attribute your improved or increased market share to?
I think Telkom, speaking for Telkom specifically, I think our data service has emerged as the data service of choice, and we continue working on that. And in fact, to your previous story, we have had very few complaints about our data service and the fact that we don't do any bait and switch, right? So I think data has been, and we've over the last 7 months, we've rolled out a network, additional 4G LTE network across the country. Because we have been very clear that even as we undertake this transaction, Telkom as a brand is one that we want to grow and promote, and therefore we spent about a billion plus shillings over the last 7 months putting up additional 4G sites so that our data service is all that much better.
Right, and one of the things that has been, a point of conversation, a point of debate has been the issue of dominance, because both Airtel, for instance, and yourselves have been, over the past, bringing up the issue of dominance in regards to Safaricom. What's your stand now as regards that issue? Well,
I'm glad that you bring that up. I mean, the issue of dominance is not necessarily brought up by Airtel and Telkom. It's a fact that we are in a market that is a dominant player. There's no question about that. And in fact, when you look at the numbers that you refer to as presented quarterly by the CEA, the reference subscribers, but when you look at revenues, even with this transaction, where we're going to create a new joint venture entity that brings together the mobile enterprise and carrier businesses of Airtel and Telkom under Airtel Telkom, we will still be only responsible for 10% of the revenues in the telco sector, whereas the dominant player is at 90%. So there's no question that dominance exists as a fact, has not been brought up by either Telkom or Airtel. However, to your question about what our stance is, my personal view is that the debate about dominance and what to do about it needs to change. I think it should not be the three players, or eventually now the two players, going at each other, egged by the media. I think we as a nation need to sit down, look at the future of this country, look at the next 5-10 years, all the technological advancements that are coming down the pipeline, and say, how do we structure the telco sector, the market in this country, so that the consumer is best able to take advantage of what's happening in the future. And clearly we need a much more competitive situation amongst the telco players. We need regulatory relief that does not harm any of the players. In fact, this transaction we're undertaking, we're bringing together Airtel and Telkom businesses, is basically a first step towards saying, let's do something about this market. It will create a duopoly, which would help, which allows for more investment into the network, brings our various resources, our subscribers, our network, our market intelligence together to bear. But this is a moment where the country should stop and say, now that this is happening, what else do we need to do so that once and for all we resolve the issue of competitiveness and innovation in this market? My view is that the players should sit together with the regulator, with other actors, and determine what is best for Kenya. We have certain ideas which we want to bring to the table, ideas which say we have Safaricom as a national champion, which has been a leader in this market. The idea is not to bring down, there's this PhD concept, pull him down. That's not the idea. And I think maybe the debate up to this point in time has been seen as a pull him down kind of debate. It should not be. I think we should make sure that whatever we come up with is mutually beneficial to all players and actors, but most importantly, allows for a competitive scenario in which consumers benefit from two things: value for service, value for money, service, and innovation. When you have a dominant player and two laggards who are very far behind, or even one laggard, because there'll still be one laggard even after the transaction is complete, what happens is a situation where the dominant player doesn't feel there's no competitive juice to force innovation. The laggard is so far behind, they feel, what we do let's not waste too much money trying to be too innovative. That's not a good situation. In fact, this is a unique situation globally. There's no other market globally that is in this scenario where dominance has actually been achieved. But just to reiterate that, given where we are today, the dominance is a fact, and where we know that a lot of Kenyans' businesses are dependent on the dominant player, whatever we do must take cognizance of the fact that we do not want to damage the dominant player. We just want to make sure that there's a situation where the others grow and further investment into the sector to allow innovation takes place.
All right. So let's say hypothetically you get all your regulatory approvals and go ahead, and let's say you start 2020 when you're one unit. In how long do you foresee yourself, hitting profitability?
I think that profitability would be something that would achieve pretty quickly. In my view, once you have the joint combined entity.
Yes.
But profitability is not it. When you have a player who's doing $1 billion just breaking even, you're still far behind. And what you need is profitability that allows you to reinvest into the network. Now, to reach that level of profitability, where you're able to spend maybe $1 billion every few years to expand the network, which is what Kenyans require, without additional regulatory reform and relief, that's unlikely to happen because the dominant player is too far ahead. When you have 90% of revenues controlled by one player and only 10% by the other player, the second player, it becomes difficult for the second player to invest as he should. And therefore, and I will keep repeating this, at the end of the day, there's no monopolies in the world that work for consumers. Competition is what gins up competitive juices that gin up innovation. So profitability we will get to, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is a situation where our consumers get innovative value-added services.
But what kind of time frame are you looking at? Because then again, as much as
time frame for what exactly?
For breaking even, because Safaricom is the one that's been making profits.
Dan, let me say this: breaking even is not an objective of any business, right? And I've said breaking even will happen next year or so, couple of years, but that's not the intention. The intention is to be able to have reserves to invest into expanding the network. A telco business is quite costly. Putting up all these base stations across the country is a very expensive affair. And so you need not just to break even, but to be able to have the kind of bottom line that allows you to keep investing, putting up new technology. Technology in the telco sector also changes rapidly, right? Just a few years ago, talking about 2G, then 3G came along, then 4G, people talking about 5G into the future. It's an expensive affair to run a telco. So you need not just to be profitable, but to be able to generate a bottom line that allows constant investment into the network and expansion of the network. Now, that second affair, profitability is easy to get, but to get to the level where you have enough reserves to reinvest, this is where I'm saying that without regulatory relief, the combination of the two entities will be insufficient, right? And that is why my point has been that at this juncture, when we are undertaking this transaction, it's a good point for all of us as a nation to stop and say, okay, this is now taking place. We shall have a duopoly, a two-player market. Thank God that we still have some level of competition. You don't want to get to a monopoly. That would be a disaster for all of us, okay? To prevent that monopoly, what we then need to do to make sure that this duopoly then works. And those are the reforms I'm talking about, us sitting down to make sure that nothing is done to harm or to punish success, but at the same time, allow investment by other actors and other players to be confidently made so that consumers can benefit.
So, well and good, and you've explained in terms of the bigger goal you have, but still, just because profitability does give some sort of context for the sake of
profitability gives no context. I'm going to insist. That's your question. Profitability means nothing to the consumer. What the consumer needs is a network that reaches him wherever he is in this country. That is really what, as a policymaker, managing a telco sector would want to see, right? And that means you need the actors, the operators, to both be resourced enough to do what is necessary to make sure that we have networks that are able to expand, upgrade, move with technology, and offer customers and consumers the services that they need.
So you're saying that you'll not give us a timeline of when you expect to make profit?
I think I told you that in the next year or so that should not be a problem. But that's not the objective.
Okay, no, fair enough.
That's not the objective. The objective is to be able to grow this sector and expand services across the country and make sure, as I said earlier on, value for money and innovation allows us to give our clients and consumers better services.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've talked about some regulatory relief. What exactly would this entail? Maybe you could expand on that for a bit.
There are many. And there's a whole menu of relief that is that we would want to see. But and we have a wish list, I would say, but I'm not interested in presenting a wish list. My main interest is in sitting down with the other actors in the sector, including Safaricom, the government, CEA, to discuss what everyone thinks will work. Now, if you ask me, I'll give you an example. We have mobile termination rates, right? And we pay a hefty fee, right, to each other. It's not just Airtel or Telkom that pays 99 cents to the originating operator. Safaricom also pays us. The challenge is when you're 10% versus 90%, right, you end up paying a lot more to the dominant player. And for an operator who's a laggard such as we are, the fee that we pay to Safaricom is a significant percentage of our total revenues. Almost 25% of our total revenues. 15% of our total revenues, top line, okay, for a loss-making business. Whereas for the dominant player, it's a pittance. It's nothing, 1.5 billion out of their $2.2 billion, 1.5 billion shillings out of 220 billion shillings is nothing to them. A simple relief such as that, which doesn't harm the dominant player, but allows the laggards to be able to get that money and invest it directly into expanding their network, is an example of one of the reliefs that we would like to see. Yesterday, I was sitting with the ICT committee in the Senate, and we were discussing universal service. All of us contribute to the universal service. And what is this? This is supposed to be the fund that helps expand the network beyond the commercially viable areas that the operators are able to expand to roll out their network. And what happens is we have a scenario where, because of this lack of competitiveness, what we define as commercially viable is very narrow. And so the USF fund has a huge area in which to play. If we had competition, in other words, strong players who are both able to compete with each other and innovate, then they would be forced to go for marginally commercially viable customers. And that would expand coverage tremendously. What then that would allow is for the USF fund to be applied to a smaller marginalized set of consumers. So I think that the example I gave of mobile termination rates, those being eliminated, for instance, that would help. It's a very low impact in terms of harming anybody reform, but with a high impact in terms of allowing the laggards to be able to invest into the network. National roaming, so that wherever you're in the country, whether you're on Safaricom, Airtel, Telkom, you're able to get onto the network that exists in that area, right, is another reform that helps the consumer, right? So, ensuring that when it comes to mobile financial services, there's complete interoperability. So
for just on that point, you've said wherever I am, irrespective of whichever network I'm on, it connects there.
Yeah.
Might that also work against you in the sense that if, say, Safaricom has larger coverage, that will, even if, say, I have a Telkom line, but I go somewhere and probably Safaricom signal is a stronger one, might it not work against you?
No, and you know what? That is fine. And in fact, a lot of these reforms, I have to tell you, are normally timed reforms. They have a sunset period, because the idea of a national roaming proposition is to allow the smaller networks to grow their network. So you tell them, look, if you don't do it in 2 years' time, forget it. And that puts pressure. So if you come and say to Telkom and Airtel, you have 2 years of national roaming. After 2 years, it expires. If we then don't fulfill our commitments, where we're saying if you give us national roaming, we shall use that time to roll out the network to make sure that in 2 years' time that we don't need the Safaricom network. What that does is to force investment into the sector. And these are the kind of policies that policymakers and leaders should be thinking about. How do we make sure that we spur investment into the telco sector to allow, again, and I'll keep repeating this, consumers, wherever they are in the country, to benefit from the change in technology that is taking place globally. So yes, so the answer to your question is no, it would not, because it's a timed proposition, and the idea is to give time to the laggards to start to invest. To invest in the network, and if they don't do it, then they pay the price as well. So there's no free lunch, actually.
Okay. Speaking of rolling out, I know that Ethiopia, has been talking about liberalizing its telco space. Are you planning to venture into Ethiopia?
First things first, then, right? We're still dealing with the fundamentals here. We're still dealing with the Kenyan market. We have a lot to do in the Kenyan market. I know that some of the more larger global players, the Vodafones and the Oranges and all, are looking at that market. But for us as Telkom, I think we have to deal with the basics and fundamentals, which we've just been discussing, before you go out into different markets. Eventually, one day, that'll be great. But for today, our focus is completely Kenyan. It is interesting to see the northern neighbor beginning to liberalize. I mean, it's a huge market of 100 million people. And I think Ethio Telecom has about 41 million subscribers. However, for us, you've got to move from crawling to walking before you start running. So we are still wanting to move from crawling to walking. Okay.
And when you think about, like we're saying, the competition in the market, and you've seen some companies actually falling off, do you foresee then we might have additional players coming to try, if like some of the proposals that you have, which are meant to create space for the smaller players, do you foresee more telcos coming in, or will they feel that there's already the duopoly you're talking about, that they feel they may not be able to have space?
I actually believe that if we have the reforms I'm talking about, other players will be interested, because no one is interested in investing in a dominated market, especially the kind of dominance that we have in this country. It is, this, as I said, it is unique globally. You look at all countries and markets bar none. None has this kind of scenario and situation, right? And we have to ask ourselves, wait a minute, where are we headed? We're now moving from, once upon a time we had about 4 players in the market, right? They have been swallowed up, the SRs and all. Now we're moving to a 2-player market. All I'm saying is, make sure we don't go to a 1-player market, right? And so that's why this is the time for all of us to sit down. And I think without emotion. I think it's important that all players have their voice in this discussion. But to your question, yes, if you have a scenario in which investment is possible, which is what we're looking for,
yes,
then other players will be interested in coming. Of course, we have a regulatory and legal regime, of licensing regime, that gives the regulator the prerogative of determining, do we want a 3rd player, do we want a 4th player? That still remains, right? Today, even if they invite people, who's going to come? And so, accepting the regulatory and legal, the licensing aspect, the interest in investing would be spurred by the relief I'm talking about.
Okay, and let's talk about, as we close, tomorrow is when we have the budget statement being presented before Parliament. First of all, what is your expectation in terms of trying to again enable, like you said, the laggards to be able to move up, and just to make it a more an environment that's more facilitated for growth and investment?
Well, I really don't expect that the budget will be addressing laggards and stuff like that. I think it will be addressing the entire sector, all of us, from Airtel, Telkom, Safaricom, and other players in the IT telco sector, and there are many. And I think, I'm hoping that the budget will, first and foremost, allow smart government spending in the IT telco sector, because government spending itself spurs quite a bit of growth. I'm hoping that some of the long-standing government programs, e-government, and for instance, we manage one of the government fiber networks, NOFB. We're hoping that there will be funding for expanding that national optical fiber network across the country, because at the end of the day, the more that is expanded by government, right, which has got more of a public interest perspective, the better the services that are offered by all actors and all players will be. I'm hoping also that whatever taxation policies are announced tomorrow will be taxation policies that actually spur growth, not just for the telco ICT sector, but for all sectors, as opposed to sometimes inadvertently having the opposite effect, where they slow down growth. So without being privy to what the CS is going to announce, those are my hopes and expectations.
Because usually, the government at times looks for the quick money in terms of the fast-moving goods and services. So at times you might find that your your sector is one of the easy targets.
Correct.
Because in the past it used to be a lot of the alcohols and the likes, and you're one of the easy targets. Are you possibly foreseeing anything that may come at?
Well, I hope not. And let me say this, because you mentioned in the past alcohol and cigarettes, and I think the former president, when he was finance minister, nicknamed them the syntax.
Syntax.
This is just to say that there's nothing sinful about telco services that we offer. Yeah. So they should not be treated the same way. And secondly, to say, penny wise, pound foolish. That should be a mantra that any senior policy maker follows. That the quick buck, and there's tremendous pressure today, I know, given our debt situation, especially our debt service, our annual debt services situation. There's great pressure to look for money. But at the end of the day, you need to build into the future. And the investments you make today, and when I say investments by government, is to allow a taxation regime that allows businesses to grow, especially small and medium-sized businesses, to grow so that in future, you painfully are able to recover a lot more taxes, as opposed to the temptation to take short-term taxes that kill businesses, that really allow no growth, and therefore in the future, you're in kind of a vicious circle. So I hope that there's tremendous fortitude in the government with the CS to make sure that despite the pressure to be short-term, that he is not penny wise and pound foolish. Okay,
and many people have complained about the cost of living. The economy is difficult, and aside from the market dynamics that you have, which are for your sector, have you really felt this as Telkom, the tough economy?
Well, maybe peripherally, but they say that no matter what happens, people tend to talk a lot, and they don't stop talking. It's one of our vices as human beings. But for the telco sector, it's a happy vice. No, I would say that this year we haven't seen the kind of growth in the telco sector, and I think this is true for the entire sector that we've seen in prior years. But I think we're still seeing growth in the sector. Maybe not as strong as in prior years, and it could be much stronger with the right set of regulatory and legal reforms. But we have growth nonetheless.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And as we close, I'm reminded that Nation Media Group is celebrating 60 years of existence, and over the years we've, for instance, covered you and different things. Maybe you've got any comment on this?
On the nation's
we're still in our celebratory mood, so.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I think obviously we know that the story of the Nation Media Group, and especially the Nation, which started it off way back in 1959, is a story of Kenya, especially the story of independent Kenya. And the fact that His Highness the Aga Khan, at a very young age, in the late 50s, straight from Harvard, had the foresight and fortitude to say, look, I'm going to start a peace through which, an entity through which the African can be able to have a voice coinciding with independence. That is something that must be, I think we should remember, celebrate. And I think over the years, the Nation Media Group has been the voice of Kenyans. I remember when I was in high school in the 80s and in college in the early 90s, voiceless Kenyans found their voice through the Nation. First the Nation newspaper, and then eventually the NTV that came up. And my hope and prayer is that you don't forget that you keep to your tradition, and you keep to making sure that you remain the voice of Kenyans, the responsible voice of Kenyans, right? That's my hope and prayer. But congratulations on your 60th anniversary. As you said, I've engaged with the Nation for many, many years, and I've seen the developments over the last 15 years that I've engaged with the Nation Media Group, the new products and services you've offered, from NTV to the print media, Business Daily, the East African, all very good. But I will repeat that I really wish for the day when I will see headlines, at least twice or thrice a week, about the new roads that we're building in this country and the new companies that are coming up in this country, and have the byline, what we see as the headlines today, going in the inner pages. I see sometimes we have spectacular sports feats, until that becomes a side story. So and that's not just I'm not talking about NTV, I'm talking about the media generally. But the Nation Media Group has been the leader. And as the leader, you set the pace. And help us set the pace to make sure that we have responsible journalism, that other media houses also follow. And therefore, Kenyans get informed responsibly.
Thank you very much.
So congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure your comments on the media coverage and responsibility, Mark Masai, who has a show Press Pass, should be taking note, and that would inform a good conversation on the show. Thank you very much, Mugo Kibati, the CEO of Telkom Kenya.